Hi, I'm Matt Hoffman, and this is the Bub and Pop podcast where we talk about music, careers in music, life, the universe, and everything. Hi, I'm Matt Hoffman, and this is the Bub and Pop podcast. Our guest today is Jefferson Waful. If you don't know Jefferson's name, but you've been a jam band fan for the last 30 or so years, you most likely are familiar with his work. Jefferson's a lighting director and spent years lighting both Moe and Umphrey's McGee. More recently, I've seen him run lights for gigs with bands like Muscle Tough and Reprise. And regardless of the size of the room or the rig, Jefferson does awesome work. And it was really cool to hear him talk about his perspective, not only as a lighting director, but also as a fan, and in his capacity with On Location, where he has interviews with artists and athletes and other public figures at various large events. Jefferson's an awesome guy. The city of brotherly love is lucky to have him, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. How did your work in video production and specifically lighting production kind of come to be?
So I have been doing video editing since I was probably 10 years old. And before that, I was hitting record and pause on the VCR, trying to mimic linear editing.
Sure.
And all through college, I was doing editing. And then when I got out of college, it was that weird time in, technological history where you couldn't edit unless you had access to a television station or you were rich and somehow had a big clunky linear editing machine. So I went about 10 years without doing any video editing, and that's kind of where I got my feet wet in the music industry. I was managing a young band called Uncle Sammy, learned how to do lights just kind of on a whim with them because we didn't have anyone else. And then in the mid, 2005, 2008, somewhere in there, I got a laptop that I could resume editing, and I realized that I had to learn a new skill because non-linear editing was now the norm, but it came very naturally because I already had the mindset of being an editor for so long. And then after I did that for a while, then I somehow became a lighting designer, and then I didn't do a lot of editing for a while. Then I came back to editing, and I realized that all my experience as a lighting designer had made me a better editor because I knew kind of the marriage of visuals and sound. And that was a really interesting feeling. For example, the end of a video edit, you can cut to black or you can fade to black. And I was realizing if the song is decaying, a fade works better. If it's a hard out, a cut works better. And that was all instincts that I learned from being a lighting designer. So that was kind of when I realized that, these two things are not random. It's definitely using the same part of my brain.
Interesting. How did that move from video editing to lighting first start to happen?
It was more of, I guess it's related because it was all things I was doing kind of just for fun and as a hobby, but it was more of a transition from being just a multimedia jam band aficionado or music fan, really, and jam bands kind of came as I was, coming out of high school. I saw my first Phish show in 1993, and that changed the trajectory of my career. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, and then I saw Phish, and I had my mind blown, and then I kind of took my broadcast experience into radio, and I did a jam band radio show back in the 90s before we even called them jam bands. I think I called it improvisational rock. And so, yeah, then I was managing a band, and I was totally blown away by Phish's light show, like everyone in those days, and till this day, highly influential. And we didn't have a light guy, so I just kind of started doing it for fun.
This was with Uncle Sammy?
Yes.
Okay. I remember Uncle Sammy.
Yeah, just little bar gigs where I could literally just punch out, like I'm playing the drums on a desk with my two pointer fingers, blue and red, and just kind of learning. I was learning the songs at the same time they were. We all lived in a house together, so I would be upstairs and I would hear them rehearsing in the basement, and I would literally hear them rehearse every version of the song. So I was learning it at the same point as them, and they all went to Berklee College of Music. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got like a crash course in music theory, which then working for Umphrey's all these years later was even more so. So I was very lucky to be around so many brilliant musical minds.
Sure. How did that understanding of theory start to inform the lighting work?
Well, just so many years. First, when I was younger, my oldest friend that I've known since I was 10, Max Delaney, who is the lead guitarist in Uncle Sammy, we used to sit around listening to Phish shows, and he would point things out, and he would literally teach me how to understand what was happening and, count out time signatures and kind of explain what was happening. And then with Uncle Sammy, the same thing. I would hear them all learning the songs and how to count things. And that's probably the biggest thing, is how to count odd time signatures. That was the thing that I found to be most helpful. And also, like, just being able to anticipate where a jam is going. And a lot of that, I would not cheat, but I would, with Umphrey's, for example, Jake being the main soloist, I could always tell when things were going to go up to the next gear, not only because you're counting, in 4/4 or whatever it is. Most improv is in 4/4, but I would see him be about to step on the sustain pedal. So I would know, okay, something big is going to happen. He's going to take it up a notch. And that's the most exciting thing, is when you've been around a band long enough where you start to think like they think. And one of the things that was really exciting for me is, after we had been on the road for a while, there would be certain inside jokes that would pop up. And I always felt like the improvisation was working best when everyone was kind of in on the joke. The humor and improv are so closely related. So there, we'd be watching Family Guy, and everyone would be repeating a joke, and then the music would have nothing to do with that joke directly, but people were all kind of on the same page, and I always enjoyed being in on that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And remind me how long you ran lights for them.
11 years.
Okay, wow. Tell me about that trajectory, because they were established by the time you had joined.
Oh, very, very established. I mean, they'd already played Bonnaroo and kind of blown up in the early 2000s.
So what was that like for you, coming in as, an established lighting guy in your own way, working with an established band and kind of blending the two?
It was pretty mind-blowing. It was, a part of my life that I'll never forget, because it just felt like, oh, the stars have aligned. Every metaphor you can think of, lightning in a bottle. It was that first week that I went out with them. It was, I felt, number one, I remember thinking, if I can master this, if I can do this well, I can do lights for any band in the world, because their music is so complex.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything going in. I remember the first gig I did with them, the lead singer, Brendan, gave me a list of, I think it was only like 6 or 7 songs, because it was a festival slot, so that, it was only a short set. And I did my best to learn those 6 or 7 songs, and then they didn't wind up playing any of those songs, because I think his voice was shot, and so they had to kind of come up with a new set list. But that's how kind of naive I was to their material. I knew maybe 1 or 2 of their quote unquote hits from my radio days as a jam band DJ. But it took me a while, and after, even without knowing the material at all, it was just this incredible feeling of, like, everything in my life leading up to this point was for a reason. All those years learning time signatures with Uncle Sammy, all those years learning the tendencies of soloists, all those looks. They call it the hairy eyeball, when the guitarist looks back at the drummer and just gives that subtle nod, like, okay, the solo is coming to an end. All those little nuances, it just felt like an incredible moment for me.
Sure. Well, and I mean, I'd imagine as a musician on stage, remembering, like, your A part with Umphrey's, you've got like A parts through H parts or something like that. I mean, as the lighting guy, you have to be totally plugged into all that stuff and then some, right? Like,
absolutely. And I remember with Mo, Mo and Umphrey's are very closely related, because they toured a lot. Umphrey's kind of looked up to Mo, because they're about 5 years older.
Yeah.
And I was closer in age to Umphrey's, and obviously they have different influences, and I would say that Mo is a little bit more, grounded in rock. Obviously they have some prog rock in there.
Yep.
But Umphrey's is just a little bit like more frenetic, or
Yeah.
And so I felt like if there was a knock on me as the light guy for Mo, it was probably that I was maybe a little too much at times, a little too stroby.
Oh, interesting.
And maybe that was just my own criticism. But then I felt like when I joined the Umphrey's team, it was like, oh, okay, this is more of a stylistic fit for where I'm at creatively. Not to take anything away from Mo. I love Mo. And it was just, I think maybe I was just a little bit too spastic at times.
Sure. When did you run lights for them? That was prior to Umphrey's.
Yeah, 2004 through 2008, I think.
Okay.
And by the way, that's also a criticism I think of any young lighting designer, is that there's always that tendency to kind of do too much because you've learned the songs and you want to kind of accent every little hit. And, every time the soloist would go to a, 16th note arpeggio, I'd be hitting the strobes. And then as you get older, it's the same with musicians, by the way. You get older and you realize it's the space between the notes and it's what you don't play. And, as I matured as an artist and just got older, I realized that if you have a pretty lookup and the band is kind of plateauing, they're not really doing much, you just have to put your hands behind your back and not do anything for 20 seconds.
Sure.
And that's kind of shows your, maturity. So I think both of those things kind of happened as I got older. And I feel like maybe about 5 or 6 years into my tenure with Umphrey's, I kind of hit my, the body of work that I'm most proud of.
Sure. And how do you get notes after a show or throughout the course of a run? Is it from the band, management, just stuff you're perceiving yourself? How do you continue to kind of learn from, the past gigs as you go into the next ones?
One of the things that I'm most grateful for is they never gave me any notes other than if I blacked out the stage and they needed to see something. That's purely just from a practical standpoint. But other than that, they never really gave. They would compliment me. Sometimes we would watch videos, and we used to call it game tapes. We'd be on the tour bus back in the days where we were all on one bus, and this shows their dedication to their craft. A lot of bands, as soon as they're done working, it's put SportsCenter on, which there was a lot of SportsCenter too. But on the nights where they felt good about the show, it'd be game tapes, and I would be recording the shows in those days, and I would take my camera out and I'd plug it in with the RCA jacks in the back lounge, and we'd watch the entire show again. And that was really helpful for all of us, because for them it was being able to see the show from the point of view of the audience, but it was also for me a way to get feedback from them. And in those days, it was mostly positive. And when they would debut new songs, sometimes in the in-ear monitors, they would say, "Hey, Waful, we need to be able to see for this one," and I'd make sure not to do anything. And but blacking out the stage in moderation is very impactful.
Sure.
If you do it just for a beat, when the song ends, or if there's a rest, in a prog rock section, if there's a quick little, one beat, if you can nail that with the band. For example, in their jamming, sometimes, they'd all be on in-ear monitors and talkback mics, and the drummer at the time, Chris Myers, would say off on 1, in on 2 while they're jamming. And it would be a rest and then one beat and then back. And if I could black out the stage at that exact moment, it would be so impactful, especially for somebody who wasn't familiar with Umphrey's, because it would seem telepathically, how are they doing that? Because most people are not noticing if the drummer just says something into the mic. Most people are paying attention to the soloist at the time. My favorite would be when he'd say off on 1, in on 3, because that's really off-putting.
Yeah.
And then you come in on a 3. Nobody's expecting that, and people are trying to dance to that. So that's an example of when blacking out the stage really it works.
Yeah.
Because in an improv section, nobody really needs to be able to. They know how to play their instruments. It's more about when they're playing a new song or they need to be reading lyrics.
Yep.
So yeah, to answer your question, there was never much criticism or notes in a negative sense. Sometimes it'd be hey, that looks really cool. So yeah, I was very lucky in that regard.
Yeah. Did they use talkback mics during the entire time you worked with them? And had Mo used them as well?
I don't remember. That was so long ago.
Yeah.
They may have, and if not, I wish I could tell you. That was
no. I
blurry.
think about that sometimes. Phish doesn't use them, right? And Fishman and Trey have, all of them have this decades long telepathy.
I think Phish uses them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I don't know if they use them in the same way during an improv section, but they definitely use them in between songs.
Okay.
Sometimes you can even hear it, on the webcast. You can hear.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes
I'm just not paying enough attention.
There's a spoiler. You can hear Trey kind of turn and say "antelope."
Well, yeah, because I wonder, sometimes they're using them to talk to just the sounds or the lights, or sometimes each other, and I always wonder just how are they kind of navigating that jam. But for you running lights, it's helpful to know how they're thinking about things on the rhythmic side as well.
Sure, absolutely, and it's just it's a great way of utilizing technology. I think Trey even now wears a lavalier mic.
Oh, wow.
if I recall.
Oh, well, I have to pay more
Which
attention.
is taking it
next
to
time
a
I see
whole
it.
other level because he doesn't even have to turn his head or
Yeah,
walk
for
away.
sure.
You know, with Umphrey's, you could always see, if you were paying attention, which obviously I was, you could see Brendan turn around and turn his back to the audience and say something to the mic, or Jake would, and that was always super helpful for me because I was in on the conversation.
Yeah. I've been trying to experiment with that. I saw a show the other night where I've been trying to like take notes myself because normally if I'm reviewing, I'm typing. So I set up a lav mic so I could talk to myself, and I said, I was like, "How's the quality?" He's like, "Just utterly terrible. You can't hear a fucking word you said." But you know, so be it. Well, so I also feel like that it's sort of interesting because you think about Umphrey's output, like in a lot of ways, right? Earlier on, it was like, hey, bridgeless, like, look at what we can do, you know? And then in some ways, the songs got more kind of simplified or streamlined over time. At least that's my, you know, view of some of the catalog. What was it like for you, I guess, like Running Lights evolving with them as their sound evolved?
Well, again, it was really fortunate that we were all kind of the same age because, as I mentioned earlier, I feel like as you get older, your musical tastes kind of simplify a little bit.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, there was definitely, I think the name of the album was Death by Stereo, which when they really started to focus on, you know, 4/4 time signatures, just more danceable stuff.
Yep.
More about the grooves. And so, yeah, for me, it was those were kind of learning experiences to set a pretty look and just kind of leave it and kind of paint a canvas the same way as the song structure. So like during the verse, I would do a lot of like those slow motion moves where I'd go from one position to another, but it was so slow and kind of subtle. And that's where my video background kind of comes in, you know, like, oh, this is a 4/4 time signature and 120 beats per minute. So I'm going to do, you know, slow motion because that's what the song calls for, in my opinion. And then when the chorus comes, you change to something, but then, you know, you go back to the same look for the verse.
Yeah.
Verse, chorus, and then the bridge, something new. And then maybe the jam, something new, but all very subtle and more just like painting a picture. Whereas, you know, not the run and gun of a song like Bridgeless or Wizard Burial Ground, which are all super fun, but just different.
Yeah.
You know? And I think with maturity, a lot of bands, a lot of musicians, Phish, same thing. You know, a lot of their new materials just 4/4.
Yep.
Kind of just pure rock and roll.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know if it's that they've already sort of proven themselves or like part of what made them compelling initially. It's like there's more to it than just the kind of craziness or like jazz shred of, you know, Phish in the 90s versus what they're doing now. It's just, yeah, in a lot of ways, I think like that professional maturity, like you said. So are you constantly running lights in your head when you go to see a show? Like, what is that like for you?
Not really. I'll notice things that I would do differently. And I try not to verbalize that unless I'm with like a very close friend. Because everyone interprets art differently. It's so subjective. So I would say for the most part, no. If I go to see another jam band that's similar to what I used to do, yeah, I'll make some mental notes just because I was so immersed in that world for almost 20 years. Definitely 20 years if you count Uncle Sammy, Mo, and Umphrey's. Like thousands of shows.
Yeah.
So it's hard for that. It's in my DNA now. It's hard to not see it just the way I see it. So yeah, I'll say like, that's such an obvious red moment. I can't believe they went to green there, but I would never say that out loud.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because that's like I said, it's subjective. It's art.
Well, yeah. And right. Like agreed that it's subjective, but somebody might be like, what, you would go green there? Like, or you would go red? People, it's easy to interpret like, differences of opinion as like a criticism somehow, where it's not necessarily, it's just, you know, a different way somebody else might do it.
But what does happen sometimes is I'll be with it again. I wouldn't say it around the general public, but if I'm with a close friend or if my dad and I watch a lot of Phish webcasts, so that would be an example where I would say something in the privacy of our own home. I'd say like, wow, you know, I was really feeling like a purple moment. And then like a second later, it'll go to purple. And he'll kind of laugh, but like it's so obvious if that's what you do for 20 years. You know what I mean? It's in your blood.
I'm assuming you got your dad into Phish, not the other way around.
Oh yeah,
okay.
And he got me into Neil Young. So I mean, we went to Farm Aid in I think 1998, and
yeah, I remember that year.
And, you know, to see both of our favorite bands, and then to see Neil Young come out and sit in with Phish on Down by the River of all songs, because that was the song that like my dad taught me when I was 7 years old or whatever, because it was like his favorite song that got him into Neil Young.
Oh, wow.
Got him into CSNY. So that was such a serendipitous moment we didn't think Neil would sit in because he was like, in a different world. He was a legend.
Yeah.
And then to see him come out, it was like, okay, maybe he's going to play Runaway Jim with them. And we'll see what this. Then, out of all the songs in his catalog, for it to be Down by the River, it was mind blowing. So yeah, my dad and I have a very special connection musically. And whenever I'm home, a lot of times they live on Cape Cod, so a lot of times it's in the summer, and he's probably seen, 15 live Phish shows and 50 plus webcasts.
Uh-huh.
And even if they're on the West Coast, which a lot of times they are, we watched a lot of like gorge runs.
Oh,
and
nice.
he'll stay up till 3 a.m. and wait till the end of the encore. He loves it.
How many shows have you been to at this point?
For
Phish shows.
I lost track, but given the number of years and the average, it's got to be between 300 and 400, somewhere in there.
What's it like going to a show now? I mean, just with so many under your belt. Like my first show was in 97, but I'm still, I don't know, like 30, 40 times or so. I haven't really kept track of it.
Honestly, I feel my age. I'm 50 now. And so it's an endurance challenge to just be in a crowd, because when you work for a band, you have the luxury of being at front of house and having a gate around you and having a security guard and just being in the best spot for the best sound and the best lights. So it's a challenge to, go in the front door and be in a huge crowd, and then for me anyway, just to be on my feet for 4 hours.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself to sit, or else like and I sound like such an old man, but I'm giving you the honest answer.
You have 5 years on me, and I feel the same thing.
Yeah, just my low back, just from standing so I try to, this past New Year's run, I force myself to sit. And it's hard because your instinct is like, don't be the guy sitting.
Yeah.
So I'd have to try to make a judgment call of like, Prince Caspian, I could sit, and then the guitar solo, maybe I'll stand. I don't know. But my body, it's just, I have to start doing yoga.
Oh, dude, I totally hear you. Do you have an ideal spot you like to see him from? Up close, far back.
Well, if it was up to me, it would be dead center.
Soundboard, yeah.
But I don't love GA. I like having a seat. So if it's a place like Madison Square Garden, I'll prefer a seat. Mm-hmm. But if it's a place like like an amphitheater, then dead center, halfway back to the soundboard.
Yep, nice.
Yeah.
Well, and so tell me about the work that you're doing now with on demand, kind of post, still in the music media space, but out from behind the light board.
Well, now I get to sit for my job.
Yeah.
And by the way, a lot of lighting designers sit, but I never could, just because of the way I needed to kind of be like dancing in my own way.
Sure.
If you looked at me, I didn't look like I was dancing, but I was tapping my feet, and I had to kind of feel connected to the music. So I could never do that sitting. Plus, I needed to have a line of sight over the crowd to see the band members, to see all those subtle nods. But now I'm a video director, producer, editor for a company called On Location, and we do VIP hospitality for all the major sporting events and some music. We still do, Coachella and Stagecoach and some other music-related events. But for the most part, it's, the Super Bowl and the NCAA and WWE and UFC, all the, Daytona 500, a lot of the, major sporting events. And I cut our videos, promotional videos to promote the upcoming events.
Are you a sports guy as well?
Not as much now as when I was a kid. I'm still a baseball fan, but when I was a kid, I was a huge basketball and baseball fan, a little bit football. Now I get to go to the Super Bowl, which is funny because I've never been to an NFL game up until 3 years ago. And
oh, wow.
My first game was a Super Bowl, and now I've been to 3. And it's such an exhilarating experience.
I believe it.
Like I thought I had all my life peaks through Phish shows and seeing the Grateful Dead, and live music has always been the thing that's kind of given me a peak life experience. But being at the Super Bowl was really special and really breathtaking. So
I believe it.
I feel really grateful to be able to experience that.
Yeah. Plus, right, seeing the halftime acts too. I mean, talk about a production. Like that's wild.
This year, we don't get a seat because we're working and we're there to serve our guests. And I do the interviews when I'm at the Super Bowl. I interview our guests down on the field because they're paying for these travel packages, and the highest tier gets to go celebrate on the field after the game. And so during the game, I'm just kind of like finding a couch somewhere in the back and staying out of the way. But for me, the highlight of this year's Super Bowl, and this is going to sound funny, but as a music guy, seeing Charlie Puth sing the national anthem was the emotional highlight for me. I thought it was just an amazing rendition, and to see the pyro and the military flyover afterwards, it took my breath away.
Wow. Yeah, I believe it. Well, and I guess in some ways, is this kind of hearkening back to your early journalism type work? Like, again, being, front of the camera, leading these conversations?
It really is. Yeah. I mean, I went to Emerson and I took a class called The Interview, and all we did was learn about how to do a good interview.
Okay.
And I still use those skills today. And I feel really fortunate, like all these years later, it's like 35 years or whatever, maybe now 32 years since I was in that class. And I'm still using those same skills when I'm interviewing people on the field. And a lot of these people have had a couple drinks over the course of the game, and you're just trying to get a good soundbite out of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I don't have to tell you, you're doing the interview here, but like a lot of times the best questions are statements,
Yeah.
Tell me the emotions going through your mind right now. Tell me, paint us a picture.
Yeah, I was going to ask out of curiosity, what does doing a good interview come down to? I'm still figuring it out, but
to me, it's just trying to get the person to tell a good story with a lot of emotion. And, the type of videos that I produce don't ever include my questions. So if they don't say something the way I want them to, I'll ask them to say it again. And sometimes that's in the form of a statement.
Sure.
Tell me about your experience. Tell me this. Tell me the itinerary. Since you got in town till now, tell us what you did. Because in my mind, I know the video content that we captured, and I want to marry that audio with the video. So if, the halftime show, for example, I knew we had great video of the sun going down, and I wanted to make sure that we could include that. So I need to have audio to go with that. So, tell me about that halftime show,
Yeah.
Tell me about the sunset,
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's funny. There's, it's easy to, it's just, walking a lot of different lines at the same time. I know what you're saying. I'm curious though. You mentioned that you don't like to put your questions in. Is that just a sort of artistic, stylistic choice, or is that a company policy, or just a preference on your part?
It's not a policy. Yeah, it's a preference. It's just the style of videos that we're producing.
Yeah.
Like a short form sizzle reel. For me, the biggest skill I learned from journalism is to whittle it down to the fewest amount of words possible.
Yep.
And when you're including 17 different quotes and you're trying to fit it into 60 seconds or 90 seconds, you want to take out every every but you also want to take out every piece of every sentence that doesn't need to be there. And sometimes that makes it grammatically a fragment. And it doesn't always have to be a full sentence. If it's in if you're watching video of the thing they're talking about, sometimes them just saying the sunset.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Yep.
You're looking at the picture of the sunset and you're hearing them say the sunset, and then you cut to the next person, and when you combine all the sound bites together, maybe it forms a full sentence. And you're also looking at the subtitles on the screen. So yeah, for me, it's all about saying more with less.
Yep. And Ted and I just had this experience as we were putting together the final cut of our premiere episode. The intro that I gave was like 2 minutes long. I think we cut it down to like under 30 seconds. Because it doesn't need to be. And I'm happy to talk, but like I'm having people on to let them talk. So, let them talk.
Right. And I also don't want ever to have anyone repeat the same thing within the same piece. So, for example, I went and interviewed people in the forest at Electric Forest this past year, which was an amazing experience. And what I just said was something that almost everyone said, oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm not going to include I didn't even think I used the word amazing, maybe once.
Yep.
But it's all about the variety, and it's all about, well, somebody's already said it's amazing. Like, we get it.
Yeah.
We need something else.
Yep.
So somebody else said, it's like being a kid on Christmas morning. And, oh, okay, that's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
I'll include that. So that's just an example of, only including the bare minimum. So like my question doesn't need to be in there.
Sure.
And nobody wants to hear from me anyway. It's all about putting the focus on the guests.
Well, yeah. And I think in a good, like a documentary, for example, it's weird when you hear the interviewer ask a question in a lot of cases. Sometimes they're off camera because they're, not intended to be a part of the show like that, which, just kind of makes sense. I think when done well and when cut cleanly, it flows great.
Yeah, I think like I did an hour-long documentary on Umphrey's when I was working for them, and I think there was one time, and I don't remember what it was. There was one time where you can hear my voice off camera because it was a follow-up and it was in context and it was necessary.
Sure.
So I think that is okay, but in a 60-second piece, there's no space for it.
Yeah, exactly. Have you put together any other like documentaries or films since that one?
I haven't. That was a really lucky experience because we were on the road and I had access to the band and we had plenty of time during the day to shoot it. With my life now, I just don't have the time to do that amount of work in addition to my day job. And my day job is all video all the time, but it's just a series of smaller videos.
Yep.
I think the longest video I've made in recent memory is maybe 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
But most of the videos I make are 30 seconds.
Yeah. It's funny. There's some quote attributed to like Winston Churchill or something that it's like, oh, if you want me to come give a speech, if you want a 5-minute speech, I need a month to prepare. If you want a 20-minute speech, I need a week to prepare. And if you want an hour, I can just show up now and, start talking. And I feel the same way with, written stuff and the kind of episodes we're putting together.
Yeah, and it's funny. I can't really turn that part of my brain off of like saying the most with the fewest amount of words. I see advertisements now that have already been approved by professional copywriters, and I rewrite it in my head with like less words. It'll be like 7 words, and I'll be like, you could have said that in 4.
I'm going a slightly different direction. And so I've been looking at certain just tried and true conventions and asking why more recently. So like the passive voice, everybody knows you don't use it, but why? And, my understanding is part of it has to do with just eliminating any confusion. So it's like, well, if you can use it in a way that doesn't generate confusion, like, hey, let me try that. And nobody else gives a shit about this grammar stuff, besides me, but it's it's fun to kind of think about and mess around with sometimes.
Okay.
Dude, it was great talking. I appreciate you making the time and, working with me scheduling wise to make
pleasure.
it happen.
Yeah.